questions here? I hear one in the middle here, yeah? Yes, please do stand. Yes, please stand up and say your name so we can all hear.
My name is Eric Jackson. For Matthew, I'm just curious. You pointed out that there are some potentially problematic incentives within an advocacy organization, but problematic incentives aren't actually new for journalism. I guess my question is: are those organizations kind of are they talking about how they avoid those conflicts, how they make sure that they maintain kind of the kind of independence that makes sure that the facts that they're gathering are good before they're doing the advocacy part?
Thank you. That's a great question. The short answer is it varies incredibly from one organization to the next. And so part of the issues with NGOs is that we simply have the same questions about what constitutes a credible NGO with credible reporting practices. One of the things I would point out is that different NGOs tend to favor different information functions more than others, and this tends to happen systematically. So for instance, if you look over a 20-year period and you look at which NGOs systematically tend to show up more frequently in the New York Times than on cable television news or evening network news, it tends to be groups like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, something like International Crisis Group, which are very systematically interested in reaching the power elite, right? They're really interested in reaching decision makers. Now, this in and of itself isn't unproblematic because we might say that one of the things that NGOs ought to do is do more than simply reach the power elite and things like that, right? NGOs have a variety of different information functions. Some of them are reporting-based. Some of them are advocacy-based. Some of them are just about making sure that they get the funds and the branding that they need in order to get those funds, right? And there are different ways of securing their organizational autonomy for doing that. And I think one of the interesting things to study with NGOs is to sort of do a parallel of what we've done for a long time as scholars of journalism, which is to try and understand what types of organizations, what types of institutional settings, what types of economic arrangements or policy arrangements tend to secure the most trustworthy, civically oriented news, right? And we have a really great literature about that. We actually don't have that quite so much in the scholarship on NGOs, and so I think that's actually one of the important things to do is to figure that out.
Okay. Next question. Oh, come on. Yeah? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually a question, but I represent Oxfam Intermón, which is part of the NGO Oxfam in Spain, and I'm in the communication department. And every time I meet someone in this symposium saying, what are you doing here? Because this is not your business. And actually it is, in a sense, a business. Not because I'm a journalist working in a communication department of an NGO, but actually because having independent media and having media that are looking into social issues is actually really important, not for our profit, but I think because our target is to denounce or to make public some of the things that are happening around the world, and we do, as you mentioned, have the resources and have the way to do it. So, I mean, thank you for this intervention because I think it was really, really interesting, and we're actually working on and see how we could work with journalists in a different way, not to be perceived as I need some money, but we are working on this. How can we make it available for other people to know some things that are happening around the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a question? Yes, please. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I found your talk great. I want to say that my journalism program, is thinking of remaking their journalism program, their diploma program. We have an undergraduate program and a diploma program, into a program, a global journalism program that, in part, trains people to report for NGOs. And I know that Canada has also the Monk School of Global Journalism, and UBC has also gone a little bit in that direction, too. They have an international journalism program. So I'm wondering, we have a bunch of journalism academics in the room, whether other people have had conversations about, how do you deal with a group of students who are concerned about alternative jobs, is concerned about working in the industry, and that's one of the reasons we thought about it, and about this increasing phenomenon. So many people are working for NGOs, as you're talking about. Don't we need to think about maybe offering some training with that in mind, instead of excluding them from the conversation.
Yeah, so very quickly, I would just say that I agree entirely, and also that it's really important to distinguish what types of work people actually want to do at NGOs, because NGOs do have communication departments that are interested in raising awareness for publicity stuff, but are also involved in doing PR type work in terms of donations and stuff like that. And then there's research jobs, which are in fact very importantly different and differentiated internally, usually within these organizations from them. And so I think it's a huge opportunity, and I think that was one of the pieces of Dan Gilmore's piece in Slate, is that there is a real opportunity for J schools here, and it's a question of whether or not we're going to pick up on it.
Yeah, I will just say at University of Iowa, we have, the last 2 years, I think, started a philanthropy certificate program. So, and we have a lot of interest in that among the students, a real interest in doing nonprofit kinds of work.
I have a
Thank you. Yep.
I have a question for Ed. So I'm a reader of Deadspin, and what I love about Deadspin is the fact that they call out a lot of the sports writers on poor reporting or oh hey there. I'll start again. This question's for Ed. I'm a reader of Deadspin because they call out writers when they don't report properly. Sometimes it's in poor taste, but also their articles are put in the form of a sort of a comment system. You know, the readers are part of the conversation. And also, as you said, athletes are breaking news themselves. Do you get a sense that the form of sports writing is changing in a sense where it's more collaborative between the reader and the writer? And the sports writers you talk to don't seem to be wanting to adapt to that. Do you think they will have to in due time? Because people want to know about athletes' lives and tattoos and you know, and different aspects of what's going on with them. And do you get a sense that this will have to change for the people that you spoke to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also a big fan of Deadspin, and I especially love the comments section where you'll get a lot of good wit in that area. It's interesting that one of the most experienced reporters we interviewed asked him about Deadspin when he was talking about blogging, and he refused to acknowledge the existence of Deadspin. Just acted like he had never heard of it, and it was comical in that sense. But really, it was the younger reporters that liked Deadspin more, as you would expect. The older did not like it, in part because of what you're saying. Awful Announcing also, you know, finds bad things in sports journalism, points them out, but doesn't get the negative reaction that Deadspin does. You know, so of course, you know about the history of ESPN not respecting Deadspin either. But you know, the younger folks were talking about that through Twitter, of interacting with. It gives them a chance to interact with readers, and the older journalists did not like that. And maybe it's just the world that you grew up in. If you're younger and you're involved with social media, you're on Twitter regularly, you learn to be interactive. Whereas in the old days, it was you produce the news, you disseminate it, and then maybe you get some phone calls to complain or compliment you on the story. So it is changing, I think, with younger people. As far as Deadspin goes, I don't know if that type of journalism is going to catch on, but hey, it's the most popular sports blog in the world. And they have broken major news like the Mark McGuire story and other areas as well. So you'll see more people trying to spin off in that area as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I got the mic. Sorry, I'm Jacob Akol. I'm from South Sudan. I'm over here. Sorry, you want me to get up? I got something on my lap. Just to add something to what Matthew was saying as a confirmation. NGOs, you know, when it comes to Africa, NGOs and journalists are dependent on each other. They are interdependent. NGOs want the big shots like the CNN, ABC, BBC to report about what is happening. The journalists themselves in the 80s and 90s in Africa found it very difficult to actually find out what exactly was going on, because the governments, like the Ethiopian famine of 84, 85, would not allow them to go to those areas. So they were dependent to find out what the NGOs actually knew. It's exactly the same thing in Somalia, in the genocide in Rwanda, and in the civil war in Sierra Leone. Practically throughout Africa, NGOs have been dependent on what the media reports back here in the West, and the journalists were dependent on what the NGOs knew. Just an addition to what you said.
Thank you.
Yeah, this goes to Matthew Powers. So it sort of gets to the question of who's a journalist. When you think about some of the training that publicists and public relations professionals go through, and one of their marks of success is to be able to write like a good journalist, what's the difference here? I mean, what makes these NGO writers journalists, or like journalists, rather than public relations practitioners?
So my quick response would be that it would be a lot more useful to just start with what types of information are they producing. So you absolutely have PR functions within NGOs that are trying to tout some advocacy point, or trying to raise awareness because they need money, or sometimes they're trying to talk about a research report that's just not getting any attention, right? Now, all of those have very different civic functions. They're very different types of news, and we need to understand each one for what it is. So rather than saying when are NGOs doing journalism and when are they doing something else, I think a more productive question is to say, what's the full panoply of things that NGOs are involved in producing? Because sometimes these things are literally people who are actually going somewhere, reporting on the ground, right? Sometimes it's people sitting in an office saying, we need to boost membership, and we need to boost our profile, and we need to find ways of doing that, right? And sometimes it's stuff that involves the transmission of information to very specific targeted publics that really don't rely on the mass media at all, right? And they'd actually prefer not to have the mass media involved. And I think that in order to understand these things, the most useful way is to just try and appreciate the different things for what they are, rather than saying either there's nothing new under the sun or this isn't quite journalism.
Can I just ask one? I have a question for Logan and maybe for Ted as well. So in your study, it was health journalists that you looked at. Do you have this is speculative, but do you have a sense of does it kind of play out the same way for other kinds of journalists, do you think? Or is this something that you might be, are there specific issues for the kinds of journalists that you looked at?
My hunch is yes. We designed the study that way, just as sort of a best case scenario. If we were going to find branding, would it be among a particular beat of journalists? Probably yes. So that's why we designed the study that way. But my other study looked at political journalists, and I found them having some of the same behaviors. So my sense is that yes, it's a profession-wide thing and not specifically to a beat.
We'll take one more. Yeah, way up in the top there. Yeah.
Hi. Mark Coddington. I had a question for Ted, and it's kind of an extension of what Jane just asked Logan. I was pretty amazed at sort of the level of vitriol that your interviewees expressed towards blogging. Not that it was there, because we've seen it over and over and over again with journalists, but the degree to which this animosity existed, especially given that sports journalism, like you've said, has been really particularly involved in these new technologies. So you might have expected sports journalists to kind of get over it earlier. But I mean, it was really kind of absurd. And it's like 2003 levels of bloggers versus journalists. And I'm wondering, and this is also speculative, is there something about the kind of sports journalist kind of professional identity or the sports environment that has allowed this animosity to continue much longer, possibly, and stronger than professional journalists as a whole?
Yeah, I believe that's a great, that's a great assessment. Basically, the idea being that newspaper sport journalism is one of the most competitive professions you could be in terms of not only on the beat, but also getting those jobs. If you worked in the newsroom, sometimes there were 15, 20 applicants for a job covering crime or cops, and there were 250 for a job covering prep sports. And so the idea being, and a lot of them were people without college degrees that were sitting on bar stools, but there are a lot of people out there that would take that job in a second. So I think they feel this is their terrain, and now you have, from the internet, and this has been the case for more than a decade, all these external threats coming about. And you got to remember, we interviewed, these were people that had been in the field for at least 7 years continuously. So in most of these cases, they were there when blogs started. And the other thing that's interesting is that almost all newspaper sports reporters have been required to keep a blog online. It's one area that many of them really struggled with. What do I put here? Do I put extra notes? Do I put an opinion piece? Well, how am I supposed to do an opinion piece when I'm covering a team and I need to remain objective? And yet, for bloggers, natural bloggers, that was an easy thing to do because you're not worried about someone claiming you're not objective or something along that lines. So definitely I sensed some bitterness there, and it was more so, again, from the older folks that we interviewed, more established than younger. So that's something that will probably change over time. But part of it is the idea you're still in their terrain as actual real journalists, real reporters through their vantage point, whereas a blogger in many cases has no journalistic training or even a press pass.
We have to stop. I'm sure we could keep going. Thank you so much to our authors.